The morning sun barely touched the stone walls of the palace when Marcus took his position at the grand entrance. He stood like a statue, his uniform perfectly pressed, his boots polished until they reflected the sky above. At 42 years old, he had served the royal family for 20 years. His face showed no emotion, just like it had been trained to show. People walked past him every day, but nobody really saw him. He was just another guard, another piece of the palace decoration. But Marcus was different from the other guards in ways that nobody knew. Deep inside his chest there was a heavy weight that he carried every single day. It was the weight of loss, the weight of promises broken, and the weight of a heart that had turned cold many years ago. 20 years earlier, Marcus had been a different man. He smiled easily back then. He laughed with his fellow soldiers. He believed in duty and honor, and serving something greater than himself. He had joined the royal guard with dreams in his eyes and hope in his heart. His own father had been a guard before him, and his grandfather too. It was family tradition, family pride. Everything changed on a winter night when Marcus was just 22. He had been given specific orders to guard the eastern gate of the palace. The orders came directly from the captain of the guard. Marcus followed those orders perfectly, just as he had been trained to do. He stood at his post without moving, without questioning, without thinking for himself. That same night, a fire broke out in the servants' quarters on the opposite side of the palace. The smoke rose into the dark sky and screams filled the air. Marcus heard the commotion. He smelled the smoke. Every part of his body wanted to run and help. But his orders were clear. Stay at the eastern gate. Do not leave your post. Never abandon your position. So Marcus stayed. He stood there while the palace burned. He stood there while people ran past him carrying buckets of water. He stood there while servants begged him to help. He followed his orders exactly as he had been taught. Among those who died that night was a young woman named Elena. She worked in the kitchen. She was kind and gentle. She always smiled at Marcus when she passed by. They had talked a few times. She made him laugh. He had been planning to ask her to walk with him in the gardens, but he never got the chance. Elena died in the fire while Marcus stood at his post, following orders that meant nothing while people died. The guilt ate at Marcus like a disease. He blamed himself. He blamed the orders. He blamed everyone who had taught him that following orders was more important than thinking for himself. After that night, something inside him died along with Elena. The part of him that trusted, that believed, that followed without question. Oh wow. It all turned to ash just like the servants' quarters. From that day forward, Marcus made himself a promise. He would never follow orders blindly again. He would never let rules and commands stop him from doing what was right. He would question everything. He would refuse everything, and if people didn't like it, they could remove him from the guard. He almost hoped they would, but they didn't remove him. Instead, Marcus became known as the difficult guard, the stubborn one, the one who questioned every command. When told to check the morning deliveries, he asked why. When ordered to patrol the north wing, he wanted to know the reason. When commanded to attend the changing of the guard ceremony, he simply refused. His fellow guards whispered about him. The captains grew frustrated with him. The palace staff avoided him. But Marcus didn't care. He wore his reputation like armor. Let them talk. Let them be angry. At least he was still alive. At least he could look at himself in the mirror. The current captain of the guard, a stern man named Roland, had tried everything to deal with Marcus. He had yelled at him. He had threatened him. He had offered him easier positions. Nothing worked. Roland couldn't understand why Marcus stayed in the guard if he hated following orders so much. But Marcus had nowhere else to go. This was all he knew. And maybe, deep down, he was punishing himself by staying in the place where his failure had happened. Years passed this way. Marcus grew older. His hair started showing gray. Lines appeared on his face. But his stubbornness never softened. If anything, it grew harder with each passing year. He became like the stone walls he guarded are, cold, unmovable, silent except when refusing yet another order. The other guards learned to work around him. They stopped giving him important tasks. They stopped including him in their conversations. Marcus was there, but he wasn't really part of the team anymore. He was alone, and he preferred it that way. Alone meant safe. Alone meant no one else could die because he followed stupid orders. The palace itself had changed over the years, too. The old king who had ruled when Marcus first joined the guard had passed away. His son took the throne, a serious man who cared deeply about tradition and rules. This new king had a wife, a queen who was admired by everyone for her grace and kindness. And they had a daughter. The princess was young, only 7 years old. Her name was Sophie. She had dark curly hair that bounced when she walked. Her eyes were bright and curious. She asked questions about everything. She talked to everyone from the highest nobles to the lowest servants. She had not yet learned that some people in the palace were supposed to be invisible. Marcus had seen the princess around the palace, of course. She was hard to miss. She ran through the hallways when she was supposed to walk. She laughed loudly when she was supposed to be quiet. She treated the palace like a playground instead of the serious formal place it was supposed to be. The king and queen tried to teach her proper behavior, but Sophie had a spirit that couldn't be easily contained. Marcus paid no more attention to the princess than he paid to anyone else. She was just another royal family member, another person who would grow up giving orders that guards were expected to follow without thinking. He had no interest in her, and he assumed she had no interest in him. But he was wrong about that. Very wrong, and soon. Everything in his carefully controlled, closed-off world was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. Sophie had been watching Marcus for weeks before she decided to approach him. She was a curious child, always noticing things that adults missed. While everyone else in the palace seemed to ignore the guards, treating them like furniture, Sophie saw them as people. She wondered about their lives, their families, their thoughts. But Marcus was different from the other guards. Sophie noticed this immediately. The other guards stood straight and still, but there was something soft in their eyes when she passed by. They would give her tiny smiles when no one was looking. Some would wink at her. A few would whisper, "Good morning, princess," in gentle voices. Marcus never did any of these things. He stared straight ahead as if she didn't exist. His face was like carved stone. There was something sad in his eyes, something that made Sophie's heart hurt even though she didn't understand why. She had never seen someone look so lonely while standing in a room full of people. One afternoon, Sophie was running through the main corridor when she dropped her favorite toy, a small wooden horse that her grandfather had given her before he died. The toy rolled across the marble floor and stopped right at Marcus's feet. Sophie froze. She looked at the toy, then at Marcus, then back at the toy. She walked slowly toward him, her small shoes making soft sounds on the floor. She stopped a few feet away and looked up at his face. He didn't move. He didn't look down at her. He just kept staring straight ahead as if she wasn't there. "Excuse me," Sophie said in her small voice. "That's my horse." Marcus said nothing. He didn't even blink. Sophie bent down and picked up her toy. She stood there for a moment, studying the guard's face. Then she walked away, but she kept thinking about him for the rest of the day. The next time Sophie saw Marcus, he was standing guard outside the library. She had come to return some books. As she walked past him, she said hello in a bright voice. Marcus didn't respond. Sophie stopped and turned around to look at him. "Can you hear me?" she asked, still nothing. The guard might as well have been a statue. Sophie's tutor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, gently took her arm. "Come along, princess. Guards are not supposed to talk while on duty." "But the other guards talk to me," Sophie protested. "That's because they're being friendly, dear. But technically they shouldn't. This guard is simply following the rules more strictly." Sophie thought about this as Mrs. Chen led her away. But something didn't feel right about that explanation. The other guards followed rules too, but they still had kindness in their eyes. This guard had something else, something darker. Over the following week, Sophie made it her personal mission to get some kind of reaction from Marcus. She would say good morning every time she saw him. She would ask him questions about the weather. She would tell him about her day. She would show him drawings she had made in her lessons. Marcus never responded. Not once. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement crossed his face. Other guards started to notice what the princess was doing. Some of them smiled at her persistence. Others felt embarrassed for her. A few tried to warn her that this particular guard was known for being cold and difficult. But Sophie didn't give up easily. She was her mother's daughter, and the queen had taught her that everyone deserved kindness no matter who they were or how they acted. One morning, something different happened. Sophie was walking through the East Wing with her mother. The queen was discussing plans for a charity event with her assistant. Sophie was half listening, half daydreaming, when she saw Marcus standing at his usual post. As they walked past, Sophie waved at him. The Queen noticed and paused in her conversation. "Sophie, darling, why do you keep trying to talk to that guard? Mrs. Chen told me you speak to him every day." Sophie looked up at her mother. "Because he looks sad, Mama, and lonely. I think he needs a friend." The Queen glanced at Marcus, seeing him perhaps truly for the first time. She saw what her daughter had seen. The rigid posture that came not from discipline but from pain. The eyes that stared at nothing because looking at anything meant feeling something. "That's very kind of you, Sophie," the Queen said softly. "But some people prefer to be left alone." "Why?" Sophie asked. "Being alone makes the sadness worse. You told me that once, remember? When I was sad about grandfather dying, you said I shouldn't hide in my room alone." The Queen smiled despite herself. Her daughter had a way of remembering everything and using it at the most unexpected times. "You're right. I did say that. But adults are complicated, my love. Sometimes we don't always follow our own good advice." That evening, the Queen mentioned the conversation to the King. He was less sympathetic than his wife. "The guard's personal feelings are not our concern," he said, signing documents at his desk. "As long as he does his job, his emotional state is irrelevant." "But he doesn't do his job," the Queen reminded him. "Roland complains about him constantly. He refuses orders. He questions everything. He's difficult with everyone," the King sighed. "Roland has been trying to dismiss him for years, but the man has done nothing that technically warrants dismissal. He's never violent. He's never drunk on duty. He's never stolen or lied. He's just uncooperative, and unfortunately, being uncooperative isn't enough reason to remove a guard who has served for 20 years. Maybe that's the problem," the Queen said thoughtfully. "Maybe he's been here too long. Maybe this place holds bad memories for him." But the King had already moved on to other matters, and the conversation ended there. Sophie, however, had not moved on. She continued her daily attempts to connect with Marcus. She brought him flowers from the garden, leaving them near his post. She drew pictures of him in her art lessons and left them where he would see them. She even tried standing next to him in complete silence, thinking maybe he preferred quiet company. Nothing worked. Marcus remained as cold and unresponsive as ever. The other guards started to feel bad for the princess. One of them, a young man named Thomas, approached her one day. "Princess Sophie," he said gently, "why do you keep trying with Marcus? He's not going to change. He's been like this for as long as any of us can remember." Sophie looked at Thomas with her serious, wise beyond her years expression. "My grandfather used to say that the hardest rocks are the ones that need the most patience to break through." He wasn't really talking about rocks. He was talking about people. Thomas smiled. "Your grandfather was a wise man." "He was," Sophie agreed. "And he also said that everyone has a reason for building walls. We just have to care enough to find out what that reason is." The young guard had no response to that. He simply nodded and returned to his duties, thinking that this little princess understood more about people than most adults ever would. But understanding Marcus and reaching Marcus were two very different things. And as the weeks turned into months, even Sophie began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, some walls were too high to climb. The day everything changed started like any other day. Marcus stood at his post in the main corridor, his face blank, his mind somewhere else. He had perfected the art of being physically present while mentally absent. It was the only way to survive another day in this place that held so many painful memories. Sophie passed by him that morning, as she did every morning. "Good morning, Marcus," she said cheerfully. She had learned his name from the duty roster she had sneaked a look at in Captain Roland's office. "It's a beautiful day today. The roses in the garden are blooming. You should see them." As always, Marcus said nothing. Sophie sighed and continued on her way to her morning lessons. But fate had different plans for that day. Around mid-morning, a commotion began in the north wing of the palace. A visiting diplomat had brought his young son, a boy of about 10, who thought himself very brave and adventurous. The boy had climbed out onto one of the high window ledges, trying to get a better view of the palace grounds. Now he was stuck. The ledge was narrow and crumbling. The boy was too frightened to move forward or backward. He clung to the wall, tears running down his face, calling for help. Palace staff rushed to the scene. Guards came running from their posts. Captain Roland arrived, already shouting orders. "Someone get a ladder." "Oh, wait, Oaro. It's too high for a ladder." "We need rope. Get rope from the stables, someone informed the king. Everyone was talking at once. The diplomat was panicking. The boy's mother had fainted. People were running in different directions, each thinking they knew the best solution. But no one was actually doing anything useful. Marcus heard the commotion from his post. Every instinct told him to stay where he was. This wasn't his problem. He had his orders to stand guard in the main corridor. Whatever was happening in the north wing was someone else's responsibility. But then he heard a small voice cut through the chaos. It was Sophie. Please, someone help him. He's going to fall. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He tried to ignore it. This wasn't his concern. He had his post. He had his orders. He would not be moved by emotion again. That path only led to pain, but Sophie's voice came again, higher now, more desperate. Please, why is everyone just standing there? Help him! Marcus closed his eyes. He saw Elena's face in his mind. He heard the screams from that night 20 years ago. He remembered standing at his post while people died. He had sworn never to follow meaningless orders again, but he had also sworn never to let emotion control him. These two promises had lived inside him for 20 years, fighting each other, tearing him apart. Captain Rowland's voice boomed through the corridor. Marcus, stay at your post. We need all corridors guarded in case this is a distraction for something else. There it was. The order. The thing Marcus always refused. But this time, refusing the order meant doing something. It meant making a choice. It meant caring again. Marcus stood frozen. The boy on the ledge was crying harder now. The stone beneath his feet was cracking. People were still running around, but no one was getting any closer to actually helping. They were all waiting for someone else to take responsibility, to make a decision, to act. Sophie appeared in the corridor, running toward the north wing. Her tutor was chasing after her, calling for her to stop. As Sophie passed Marcus, she stopped suddenly and looked up at him. You can help, she said, her voice desperate but somehow certain. You're tall and strong. You can reach him. Please, Marcus. Please help him. It was the first time she had asked him for something. In all the months of her trying to talk to him, she had never actually asked him to do anything. She had just wanted him to acknowledge her, to be kind, to be human. But now she was asking, and her eyes held the same look that Elena's eyes had held: real trust, hope, belief that he was better than he thought he was. Marcus looked down at this small princess who had spent months trying to break through his walls. This child who saw him as a person when everyone else saw him as a problem. This little girl who believed he could help when he had spent 20 years believing he couldn't help anyone. Something inside Marcus cracked. It wasn't a loud break. It was quiet, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. Without a word, Marcus turned and walked toward the north wing. Behind him, he heard Captain Rowland shouting, Marcus, I gave you an order. Return to your post immediately. Marcus didn't stop. He didn't respond. For the first time in 20 years, he was refusing an order for the right reason. Not because he was bitter or angry or punishing himself, but because someone needed help and he could provide it. When Marcus reached the window where the boy clung to the ledge, the crowd parted. They saw something in his face that made them step back. Marcus looked out at the boy. The ledge was about 15 feet from the window, running along the outside wall. It was old stone, crumbling, dangerous. What are you doing? Captain Rowland demanded. Get back to your post! Marcus ignored him. He studied the situation with the focused calm of someone who had finally found purpose again. The boy was about 10 feet to the left of the window, on a section of ledge that was beginning to crack beneath his weight. We're waiting for rope, Rowland said. We'll lower someone down from the roof. There's no time, Marcus said. His voice was rough from lack of use. Several people jumped at the sound of it. They had never heard this guard speak before. Marcus didn't wait for permission. He climbed out onto the window ledge. The crowd gasped. Sophie grabbed her tutor's hand and squeezed tight, her eyes fixed on Marcus. The ledge groaned under Marcus's weight. He was much heavier than the boy. He moved slowly, carefully, testing each section before putting his full weight on it. The drop below was 40 feet to a stone courtyard. If he fell, he would die. If the boy fell, he would die. But Marcus had stopped caring about his own safety a long time ago. What he suddenly cared about for the first time in 2 decades was saving someone else. Stay still, Marcus called to the boy. His voice was steady, calm. I'm coming to get you. Don't move. The boy nodded, tears streaming down his face. Marcus moved along the ledge inch by inch. Below, the crowd held their breath. Sophie watched with her hands pressed to her mouth. Marcus reached the boy just as the section of ledge beneath the child's feet crumbled completely. Marcus's hand shot out and grabbed the boy's arm. For a terrible moment, they both teetered on the edge. The remaining ledge cracked. People screamed. Then Marcus pulled the boy against his chest and wrapped both arms around him. He pressed them both against the wall, distributing their weight more evenly. The ledge held. "Hold on to me," Marcus told the boy. "We're going back, slowly. Don't look down." The journey back to the window felt like it took hours. In reality, it was less than 2 minutes. Marcus moved with careful precision, feeling for stable stones, supporting the boy's weight with his own body. When they finally reached the window, a dozen hands reached out to pull them to safety. The moment they were inside, the boy's mother ran forward and grabbed her son, sobbing. The diplomat was thanking everyone, his face pale with shock. Captain Roland was trying to restore order, telling people to return to their duties. And Sophie was standing very still, looking at Marcus with something like wonder in her eyes. Marcus stood in the corridor, breathing hard. His uniform was dirty from pressing against the stone wall. His hands were scraped and bleeding slightly from gripping the rough ledge. But the boy was safe. That was all that mattered. Captain Roland approached him, his face red with anger and confusion. "You disobeyed a direct order. You left your post. You could have been killed." "What were you thinking?" Marcus looked at him steadily. "I was thinking that a child's life was more important than standing in an empty corridor." Roland opened his mouth, then closed it. He had never heard Marcus speak this much. He had certainly never heard him defend his actions. Before Roland could respond, the king arrived. He had been in a meeting when news of the incident reached him. His face was stern as he surveyed the scene. The diplomat rushed to him, still holding his son. "Your Majesty, this guard saved my son's life. He risked everything to help us. I am forever in his debt." The king looked at Marcus. "Is this true?" Marcus said nothing. His old habit of silence was trying to return, but Sophie stepped forward. "It's true, Papa. Marcus was very brave. Everyone else was just talking and running around, but Marcus actually helped. He climbed out there even though it was dangerous." The king studied Marcus with new eyes. "You are the guard who refuses orders, are you not? Captain Roland has mentioned you many times." "Yes, Your Majesty," Marcus said quietly. "Yet today you acted when action was needed. You made a choice that saved a life." The king paused, thinking. Sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to follow orders and when to follow conscience. "Today you chose wisely." Roland looked shocked. "Your Majesty, he still disobeyed a direct command. There must be consequences." "The consequence," the king said firmly, "is that this man will be recognized for his bravery. See to it, Roland." The captain had no choice but to nod, though his face showed he disagreed strongly. As the crowd began to disperse, Sophie walked over to Marcus. She looked up at him with her bright eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "You were very brave." Marcus looked down at her. For the first time in 20 years, he allowed himself to really see someone, this small princess who had spent months trying to reach him, who had never given up, even when he gave her nothing in return, who had asked him for help when everyone else had only given him orders. "You asked me to help," Marcus said, his voice rough and low. "That was different." Sophie tilted her head, curious. "Different from what?" "Different from being told what to do." "You asked. You didn't order." Sophie thought about this. "Would you have helped if I had ordered you?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "No," he admitted. "Probably not. Why not?" It was a simple question, but it cut through 20 years of armor. Marcus felt the old pain rise in his chest, but instead of pushing it down like he always did, he let himself feel it. "Because a long time ago I followed orders exactly as I was told, and someone died because of it. Someone I cared about." Sophie's eyes grew sad. "That must hurt very much." "It does," Marcus said. It was the first time he had ever admitted this out loud to anyone. "Is that why you look so sad all the time?" Sophie asked. "Is that why you don't talk to anyone?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I thought if I didn't care about anyone, I couldn't fail them. I thought if I didn't follow orders, I couldn't be controlled. But I think I was wrong." "What were you wrong about?" "I was still being controlled. By my anger, by my guilt, by my fear. I was just as trapped as I had been when I followed orders without thinking." Sophie reached out and took his hand. Her small fingers wrapped around his large, scarred ones. My grandfather told me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you're scared. Marcus looked at their joined hands. When was the last time someone had touched him with kindness? When was the last time he had let someone close enough to touch him at all? Your grandfather was wise, Marcus said. He was, Sophie agreed. He also said that mistakes don't define us unless we let them. He said we can choose to grow from them or hide from them, but hiding doesn't make them go away. Marcus felt something break open inside him. Not the painful crack from earlier, but something warmer, like a door opening after being locked for years, letting light into a dark room. I've been hiding for a very long time, he admitted. I know, Sophie said, but you don't have to hide anymore. You helped today. You were brave. You made a good choice. Over the following days, something shifted in the palace. Word spread about what Marcus had done. Guards who had avoided him started nodding respectfully when they passed. Servants who had been frightened of his cold demeanor smiled at him cautiously. Even Captain Roland seemed less hostile, though still wary. But the biggest change was in Marcus himself. He didn't transform overnight. Years of pain and isolation couldn't be healed in a few days. But small things began to change. When Sophie said good morning to him the next day, he nodded in return. It was small, barely noticeable, but Sophie's face lit up like the sun. The day after that, he said good morning back. Sophie actually jumped with joy, startling him. A week later, when Sophie showed him a drawing she had made in her art lesson, he looked at it. Really looked at it. That's very good, he said. You have talent, Sophie beamed. You think so? My tutor says I need to work on my shading. Your tutor is right about the shading, Marcus said. But the heart of it is good. The technical parts can be learned. The heart cannot. Sophie tucked the drawing carefully into her notebook. Will you tell me about the person you lost? She asked gently. The one who died? Marcus tensed. But instead of shutting down completely, he took a breath. Maybe someday, he said. But not yet. Okay, Sophie said. She didn't push. She just smiled at him and went on her way. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his small room in the guards' quarters, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about Elena's death. He was thinking about the boy on the ledge, about Sophie's hand in his, about the king's words. He got up and walked to the small window in his room. The palace grounds were quiet under the moonlight. Somewhere in this building, a little princess was sleeping, a little girl who had seen something in him that no one else had bothered to look for, who had kept trying when everyone else had given up. Marcus realized something in that moment. Elena's death had been a tragedy. His following orders that night had been a mistake born of youth and training and trust in a system that wasn't perfect. But spending 20 years punishing himself for it hadn't honored her memory. It had just created another tragedy. Elena had been kind. She had been gentle. She had seen good in people. If she could speak to him now, she wouldn't want him to spend his life cold and alone. She would want him to live, to connect, to be human again. Marcus pressed his hand against the cool glass of the window. I'm sorry it took me so long, he whispered to the memory of Elena. But I think I'm ready to try again. The next morning, when Marcus took his post, he stood a little differently. His posture was still military perfect, but there was something softer in his eyes. When Sophie came by, he greeted her first. Good morning, Princess Sophie. Sophie stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide. You said my name. I did, Marcus agreed. You never said my name before. I know, I should have. It's a good name. Sophie grinned so wide her face could barely contain it. She did a little spin right there in the corridor, her dress twirling. Today is going to be a wonderful day. And for the first time in 20 years, Marcus smiled. It was small and rusty, like an old door creaking open, but it was real. The changes in Marcus didn't go unnoticed. Captain Roland watched him carefully, waiting for him to return to his old stubborn ways. The other guards whispered among themselves, wondering if the transformation would last. But day after day, Marcus continued to change. He started accepting orders without argument. When told to patrol the West Wing, he simply nodded and went. When asked to help with security preparations for a state dinner, he showed up on time and did the work without complaint. It was strange for everyone who had known him as the difficult guard. But Marcus wasn't just blindly following orders again. He was thinking about each command, considering it, and then choosing to cooperate. The difference was small but important. He was no longer controlled by anger. He was making conscious decisions. Thomas, the young guard who had spoken to Sophie weeks earlier, approached Marcus one evening after their shift. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Marcus looked at him. Before, he would have ignored the question or walked away. Now he nodded. "Go ahead. What changed?" "I mean, everyone knows you're different now." "But what actually happened?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I remembered why I became a guard in the first place. It wasn't to follow orders. It wasn't to be a statue. It was to protect people. And you can't protect anyone if you're dead inside." Thomas nodded slowly. "The princess did that? Changed you?" "She reminded me that I was still alive," Marcus said. "That's all. The rest was up to me." Word of Marcus's transformation reached the queen. She had been watching the situation with interest, especially because her daughter was so involved. One afternoon, she requested that Marcus come to her private sitting room. Marcus stood before the queen, nervous in a way he hadn't been in years. The queen looked at him with kind but penetrating eyes. "My daughter speaks of you often," she said. "She's very pleased with your friendship." "I am honored by the princess's kindness, Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully. "Captain Roland tells me you've been different lately, more cooperative." He seems both relieved and suspicious. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "The captain is wise to be cautious. I was difficult for many years." "Why?" the queen asked directly. "Captain Roland never could figure it out." "You weren't always this way, were you?" Marcus hesitated. The queen saw his struggle and her voice softened. "I'm not asking as your queen, Marcus. I'm asking as a mother who wants to understand why a good man spent 20 years making himself miserable." Something about her tone, her genuine care, made Marcus want to speak. 20 years ago, Your Majesty, I followed orders that kept me at my post while the servants' quarters burned. A woman died that night, someone I cared about. I blamed the orders. I blamed myself. And I promised I would never let orders control me again. The queen's face filled with compassion. "Elena," she said softly. "I remember that night. I was newly married to the king then. It was a terrible tragedy." Marcus looked up in surprise. "You remember her name?" "I remember all their names," the queen said. 7 people died. Elena was a kitchen worker. She was kind to everyone. And you," the queen studied his face. "You were young. Just 22. You were at the Eastern Gate that night." "Yes," Marcus said, his voice rough with old pain. "I stood there and did nothing while she died." "You followed your orders," the queen said gently. "You did what you had been trained to do. The fault wasn't yours, Marcus. It was a failure of the system, of the command, of the circumstances. You were barely more than a boy yourself." "That doesn't make her less dead," Marcus said. "No," the queen agreed. "It doesn't. But Marcus, you've spent 20 years punishing yourself for a mistake made by a young man who was doing what he thought was right. Don't you think that's long enough?" Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. He hadn't cried since the night Elena died. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted. "You already have," the queen said. "The moment you climbed out on that ledge to save that boy, you stopped punishing yourself and started living again. You made a choice based not on blindly following orders or reflexively refusing them, but on what was needed in that moment. That's wisdom, Marcus. That's growth." Marcus stood silently, letting her words sink in. The queen rose from her seat and walked to the window. "My daughter sees the world differently than most people. She sees hearts, not just faces. She saw that you were in pain and she wouldn't give up on you. That's who she is." "She's remarkable," Marcus said. "She is," the queen agreed. "And she thinks you're remarkable too. She talks about your bravery constantly, about how you saved that boy, about how you're kind to her now." The queen turned to face him. "Marcus, I want to ask you something. Would you consider being Sophie's personal guard?" Marcus's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure I'm worthy of that honor." "Captain Roland would disagree with me," the queen said. "He thinks you're unreliable. But I think differently. I think you're a man who learned hard lessons and came out stronger. I think you're someone who will protect my daughter, not because you're ordered to, but because you choose to, and that makes you exactly the kind of guard I want for her." Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest. Trust. Someone was trusting him again. Someone was seeing value in him. "I would be honored, Your Majesty. I swear I will protect her with my life." "I know you will," the queen said. "But Marcus, I don't just want you to protect her body. I want you to protect her spirit. She's growing up in a palace full of rules and expectations. She needs someone who remembers what it's like to be trapped by those things, someone who can help her stay true to herself. Marcus nodded, understanding. I will do my best. When Marcus left the Queen's sitting room, he felt lighter than he had in years. He had a purpose again, not just standing at a post, but actively protecting someone, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He went to the palace memorial garden, where names of those who had died in service to the royal family were carved into stone. He found Elena's name and knelt beside it. I'm sorry it took me so long to come here, he said softly. I was afraid. Afraid of the pain, afraid of the guilt, afraid of everything. But a little girl helped me remember that fear is no way to live. She's remarkable, this princess. You would have liked her. She's kind like you were. Marcus traced Elena's name with his finger. I can't change what happened. I can't bring you back. But I can stop wasting the life I still have. I can be better. I can help people. I can protect that little girl who saw something worth saving in a bitter old guard. A soft breeze moved through the garden, rustling the leaves. Marcus chose to believe it was Elena's way of saying she understood. He stood up, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The guilt would never completely disappear. The sadness would always be there. But now it felt more like a scar than an open wound. When Marcus returned to his quarters, Thomas was waiting for him. The word is spreading, the young guard said with a grin. You're going to be Princess Sophie's personal guard. The other guards are taking bets on how long it will last. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And what are the odds? Most people are betting you'll quit within a month. Sophie can be quite energetic, Marcus smiled. It felt more natural now, less rusty. Then they're going to lose their money. I'm not going anywhere. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. I believe you. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're back. Back? Marcus asked. Back to being human, Thomas said simply. Welcome back, Marcus. That night, Marcus slept better than he had in 2 decades. He dreamed not of fire and smoke and death, but of a little princess with bright eyes, teaching him that it was never too late to heal. The announcement of Marcus as Princess Sophie's personal guard caused quite a stir in the palace. Captain Roland was furious but couldn't argue with the Queen's direct order. The other guards were skeptical but curious, and Sophie herself was absolutely delighted. On Marcus's first official day in his new position, Sophie bounced up to him with barely contained excitement. Does this mean you have to follow me everywhere? Within reason, Princess, Marcus said with a small smile. I'll be nearby to keep you safe. Can we go to the garden? I want to show you the roses I told you about. Lead the way. As they walked through the palace corridors, Marcus noticed how different everything felt. He had walked these same halls for 20 years, but now they seemed brighter somehow. Or maybe it was just that he was finally looking at them with living eyes instead of dead ones. In the garden, Sophie ran ahead to a section filled with blooming roses. She turned back to Marcus with a huge smile. See, aren't they beautiful? Marcus looked at the roses. Really looked at them. When was the last time he had noticed flowers? When was the last time he had noticed anything beautiful? They are, he said. Very beautiful. Sophie picked a small pink rose and brought it to him. This one made me think of you. Why? Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Because roses have thorns to protect themselves, but that doesn't mean they're not beautiful underneath. You had thorns too, but I knew you were beautiful underneath. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. This child had more wisdom in her 7 years than most people gained in a lifetime. Thank you, Princess. That's very kind. You can call me Sophie, she said, when it's just us. I like it better. All right, Marcus agreed. Sophie. Over the following weeks, Marcus settled into his new role. He accompanied Sophie to her lessons, stood guard during her music practice, walked with her in the gardens. He found that protecting someone you cared about was entirely different from following orders you resented. Sophie was not an easy charge. She had endless energy and curiosity. She asked 1,000 questions about everything. She wanted to explore every corner of the palace. She made friends with everyone from the lowest servants to the highest nobles. But Marcus found that he didn't mind. Her joy was contagious. Her curiosity reminded him that the world was full of things worth noticing. One afternoon, Sophie asked him the question he had been both expecting and dreading. They were sitting in the garden, Sophie drawing while Marcus stood watch. Will you tell me about her now? Sophie asked quietly. The person you lost? Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he sat down on the bench next to her. Her name was Elena. She worked in the palace kitchen. She was kind and gentle, and she made me laugh. I was planning to ask her to walk with me in these very gardens. What happened to her? There was a fire. I was on duty, stationed at a gate. My orders were to stay at my post no matter what. So I did, even when I heard the screams, even when I smelled the smoke. I followed my orders exactly, and Elena died. Sophie put down her drawing and looked at him seriously. You couldn't have known. No, Marcus agreed. But for 20 years I blamed myself anyway. I blamed the orders. I blamed everyone who taught me to follow commands without thinking. And I became cold and angry and impossible to work with. But you're not anymore, Sophie pointed out. No, Marcus said with a small smile. Thanks to a persistent little princess who wouldn't give up on a grumpy guard, Sophie grinned. I knew you weren't really grumpy, just sad. And lonely. I was both, Marcus admitted. But I'm better now. Not perfect. I still have hard days. Sometimes I still feel guilty. But I'm learning to live with it instead of hiding from it. Do you think Elena would be happy that you're better? Marcus thought about this. Yes, I think she would. She didn't like seeing people sad. She always tried to cheer everyone up. She would want me to be happy. Then I think you should try to be happy, Sophie said simply. For her. And for you. I am trying, Marcus said. You're helping. As the months passed, Marcus's transformation became complete. The cold, difficult guard was gone entirely. In his place was a man who smiled, who talked, who engaged with the world around him. He became known not as the guard who refused orders, but as the guard who protected Princess Sophie with unwavering dedication. He started having conversations with the other guards. He apologized to those he had treated poorly over the years. Some accepted his apology easily. Others took more time. But Marcus was patient. He had learned that healing didn't happen overnight. Captain Roland eventually came to respect Marcus, though he would never fully trust him. You've changed, Roland said to him one day. I still don't understand it, but I can't deny it. I stopped being afraid, Marcus explained. Fear makes us do strange things. It made me angry and defensive. Once I let go of the fear, everything else became easier. And the princess helped you do that? She showed me I didn't have to be afraid anymore. The rest was up to me. The king also took notice of Marcus's transformation. He called Marcus to his study one evening, a rare honor. My wife tells me you visit the memorial garden regularly now, the king said. Yes, your majesty. I go to remember, and to remind myself why I'm here. The king studied him. You've become a valuable member of the guard, Marcus. More than that, you've become important to my daughter. She trusts you completely. I will never betray that trust, your majesty. I believe you, the king said. You know, when my wife first suggested making you Sophie's personal guard, I was skeptical. But she was right. She usually is. He smiled slightly. You protect my daughter not because you must, but because you care. That makes you irreplaceable. On Sophie's 8th birthday, Marcus gave her a gift. It was a small wooden horse carved by his own hands during his evening hours. It was similar to the toy she had dropped at his feet so long ago, but this one was special. It had a tiny rose carved into its side. Sophie's eyes filled with tears when she saw it. It's beautiful. You made this? I did. The rose is to remind you that even things with thorns can be beautiful. And the horse is to remind you of the day you first spoke to me, the day that started everything changing. Sophie threw her arms around him in a hug. You're my best friend, Marcus. Did you know that? Marcus felt his heart swell. A year ago he had been alone, cold, bitter. Now he had a purpose. He had friendship. He had something worth protecting. You're my best friend too, Sophie. That evening, as the sun set over the palace, Marcus stood at his post outside Sophie's room. She was inside, getting ready for bed, chattering happily to her mother about her birthday celebration. Marcus could hear her laughter through the door. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The pain, the loss, the 20 years of isolation, the moment when a little girl had asked him for help and cracked open his frozen heart. The slow, difficult process of learning to live again. It had been worth it. Every painful step had been worth it to get to this moment. To be standing here, protecting someone he cared about, feeling alive for the first time in 2 decades. Thomas walked by and nodded to him. Good evening, Marcus. The princess had a good birthday, I hear. She did, Marcus confirmed. You look happy, Thomas observed. Marcus smiled. It was a real smile, warm and genuine. I am happy, finally. Inside the room, Sophie's voice called out. Good night, Marcus. Good night, Princess, Marcus called back. He heard her giggle. You're supposed to call me Sophie when it's just us. Good night, Sophie, Marcus corrected, his smile growing wider. That's better. Sweet dreams. Marcus stood at his post, but he wasn't the same man who had stood in these hallways for 20 years. That man had been a ghost, going through motions, hiding from life. This Marcus was alive. This Marcus had purpose. This Marcus had learned that walls built from pain could be taken down stone by stone, with patience and kindness and the stubborn love of a 7-year-old princess who refused to give up on him. The night was peaceful. The palace was quiet, and Marcus stood guard not because he had to, but because he chose to, not following orders but following his heart. And for the first time in 20 years, that felt exactly right. Years later, when Sophie was grown and Marcus was older, she would write about him in her journals. She would write about the sad guard who became her protector, the man who taught her that it's never too late to heal, never too late to change, never too late to let someone in. But that was in the future. For now, in this moment, it was simply a man and a child who had saved each other in the ways that mattered most. She had given him reason to live again. He had given her the security to grow into the remarkable person she was meant to become. And it had all started with a simple act of asking instead of ordering, of seeing a person instead of a guard, of believing that underneath the thorns, there was still something beautiful waiting to bloom. The moon rose over the palace. Marcus smiled to himself, thinking how different his life looked now. How much better it felt to be awake than asleep, to be connected than isolated, to be loved than alone. Elena would have been proud of him. More importantly, he was proud of himself. And that, he had learned, was where healing truly began.